Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Shawn Achor, who is the New York Times best-selling author of Before Happiness and the international bestseller of The Happiness Advantage. He is a happiness professional. Shawn, it is truly making me happy to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you do a lot of research about happiness. How did you get into that?
Well, I fell into it backwards. I was actually studying at the divinity school. I was studying how people's religious beliefs change the actions and the decisions that they make in the world. And when I was doing that, there were people in the psychology department, including Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar, who said I could be asking those same questions about what causes us to make the choices we do in life, what causes us to feel meaning, but to do it from a scientific perspective, which is what they were attempting to do in positive psychology. And so I got hooked.
All right. So from your research, what are some of the things that bring people a little bit of happiness?
Well, I think what's fascinating is that oftentimes we think that happiness just happens based upon our genes or our environment. That a lot of people say, well, I can't be happy right now because this is what's going on at work, or I can't be happy right now because my kid's not in the right school, or I can't be happy because I grew up with genes where they were more pessimistic and cynical, and that's just who I am. And what we started to realize was that you will be just your genes and your environment, unless you decide to change your habits and your mindset. And what we started to realize was that a lot of our research on what caused people to be like they were in terms of their levels of happiness was wrong. It turns out that only 10% of your long-term levels of happiness is predicted based upon the external world, which is why we find people in extremely impoverished situations who can still be optimistic, and in some people who could be extremely wealthy and yet can be miserable at the same time. 90% of our long-term levels of happiness is predicted not by the external world, but by how your brain is processing the world, which means if we can change the lens through which you view the world, we could change your levels of happiness. And then the other side of it was the genes. And this is the part that just fascinated me the most, is that the average person doesn't fight their genes. So when we did these scientific studies, we kept finding genes were so important. But if you look at those same graphs, if you look at people who are not average, they're the people who actually decide to make changes to their life. And what we find is that they can deviate dramatically from their genetic set point.
Okay, let's go back to a really basic question, and I don't want to sound so philosophical, but when you're referring to happiness, what are you really talking about?
That's a great question, because oftentimes when people think about happiness, they think about just pleasure, or they think about a big yellow smiley face. Actually, I got a call from the Harvard Business Review a little over a year ago, and they said, Shawn, we've been following your research on how happiness leads to greater levels of success at companies. We're going to put it on the cover of the magazine. And I was like, that's great.
That's awesome.
Just whatever you do, make it palatable. Because as soon as we start talking about happiness, people think it's about, smiley faces and having to smile all the time. So whatever you do, don't put a smiley face on the cover. And they were like, Shawn, we're the Harvard Business Review. We would never do something like that. And I don't know if you saw it, but the cover of January and February of that year was a huge yellow smiley face with $ dimples. But when I looked at the smiley face, the reason I'm mentioning that is when I looked at it, I realized that the smiley face had no eyes. It was blind happiness. And I think that's how oftentimes people think about happiness, that we have to be blind to the problems we see in our current moments in the political or economic landscape, or sicknesses in our family, or struggles we feel at work. We have to be blind to those in order to have a little bit of pleasure in our life. The way that we define happiness in this research, we took from the ancient Greeks. And the definition that we use is the joy that you feel striving towards your potential. And I love that definition, because joy is something you can experience in the ups and downs of life, and it's on the way towards your potential, but not at it. So what I love about this is not just pleasure, because pleasure can just cause us to stagnate. What we're interested in is how do we link joy to growth within our lives, joy with aspiration.
Okay, so now let's relate that to money, not in terms of how much money you have, but my day job is that I'm a financial advisor. I sit with clients and we do financial planning and investments, and there's a lot of stress, frankly, that's involved in the field, because people feel that their whole future is at stake. But you're kind of, and I'm trying to use your definition. You're saying that joy is how you feel striving towards your potential. And I talk to people a lot about what their goals are, where they're trying to go. Is it okay that when they hit those goals, they can be happy about that or feel joy?
Well, that's the fascinating part, is that when we hit those goals, we actually don't get happy for very long. The whole purpose of writing The Happiness Advantage was that I realized that most of us follow a formula, which is if I work harder and I'm more successful, I'm going to achieve these goals. And once I achieve those goals, then I'm going to feel happier. So if I can just save this amount of money for retirement, then I'll be happy. As soon as I get this promotion, then I'll be happy. As soon as I finish this project or lose 15 pounds, then I'll feel happier. That formula undergirds our parenting styles, our managing styles, our leadership styles, and it turns out it's scientifically broken and backwards for two reasons. The first reason is every single time your brain has a success, your brain changes the goalpost of what success looks like. So if you got good grades in school, now you have to get better grades so you can get into a better school. Or if you get a job, now you need to get a promotion. If you hit your sales target, we raise your sales target. As soon as somebody saves $1 million, they realize they need 2 million because everyone around them has 1 million. And what we realized was that if we raised your success rates, raised your income, raised the amount of money you had in retirement for the rest of your life, it turns out your happiness levels flatline. They remain basically the same. But if you flip around the formula, if you try and get somebody to change the way that they view the world first, if you deepen their social connection, if you change their optimism levels, if you change how they view stress in their life, it turns out every single business and educational outcome we can test for significantly improves. Their success rates rise. So in other words, what we found is if we raise your success rates, your happiness remains the same. But if we raise your levels of happiness and change your mindset first, every single one of your success rates rise. You're better at making financial decision making. You're better at doing your work. You're 31% more productive, 37% higher levels of sales. So maybe we have the formula backwards.
Mm-hmm. We are talking with Shawn Achor, who is a best-selling author of Before Happiness and The Happiness Advantage. He also has a fabulous TED Talk, which millions and millions and millions of people have watched, and I highly recommend it. In fact, we'll put links to that on the show notes at goldsteinongelt.com. And in fact, in just a minute, Shawn has said he will tell us what the number one thing you should do today to make it a happier day, because that's really his specialty. But I want to focus on something you were just talking about, which is that people who are happier tend to be more successful. And you cited some statistics that maybe we'll read your book to figure out how you got there. But why is it? What is it that being happier makes you more successful? Because frankly, I know people who are successful, at least from the outside, and they may or may not be terribly happy, but they do look pretty successful.
Absolutely. So the research that I'm talking about is wrapped around something called the happiness advantage, which is when the brain is positive, it turns out you're not diverting your brain's limited resources to scan the world for the threats and the hassles and complaints constantly. That your brain is actually able to focus and be more engaged with your task, which increases your intelligence levels. We found children, when they're positive, put blocks together significantly faster than children in a negative or neutral category. We found that doctors are 19% faster, more accurate at coming up with the correct diagnosis when they're in a positive state as opposed to a negative or neutral one. We actually found that every single business and educational outcome improves when your brain is positive. But what that doesn't mean is that the happy people are the smartest people in the room, or that the happy people are the most successful people in the room. What this is an indication of is all of us have a band of potential. And what we found is that your band of potential is determined based upon, your genes, your previous experiences, the environment you find yourselves in, the luck or opportunities you have around you. But within that band of potential, when your brain is negative, you're at the bottom end of your potential. When your brain is positive, because your brain is able to focus more of its resources scanning for opportunities to make changes, believing that your behavior matters, what we find is you're actually at the upper end of your band of potential. So what it means is your intelligence rises. It doesn't necessarily mean you're the smartest person in the room. And I met lots of people at Harvard who were extremely smart, but also extremely depressed. And what we found was that if we could change their levels of optimism, if they could get them over that depression, it turns out their intelligence and their success rates rose dramatically.
Huh. So tell me about the expression, money doesn't buy happiness. A lot of people say, those who say money can't buy happiness just don't know where to go shopping.
Actually, I would agree with that. That they don't know where to go shopping. Because it turns out happiness absolutely can, or money absolutely can buy happiness. What we found is that if it's just your income level, you're right, that doesn't have very much of an impact upon your levels of happiness. There's conflicting studies on this. But even the best ones that argue for money, they show that there's only a very slight rise in your levels of happiness as you move above the poverty line up to higher and higher levels. levels. We don't have the highest levels of income, so we don't know if it maintains at that high level because the billionaires don't respond to our surveys for this research. But what I think is fascinating is money absolutely can buy happiness. It turns out there's some studies that are coming out of Stanford right now where they just found out that what we already knew, I believe, through common sense, is that if you spend your money pro-socially, in other words, if you spend that money trying to create an experience with somebody in your family or with a friend, or if you use that money to help somebody else out so that you can raise up their own levels of happiness, it turns out instead of just reaping a short-term level of increase to your pleasure, which is what happens when we buy a new car or buy a new house, and 6 months later we go right back down to our baseline. It turns out that pro-social spending, when we spend it for other people, that altruistic spending, we actually reap an advantage that continues to cascade, that every time we remember it, we feel good about it, we smile about it, and we tell other people about it. And so what's amazing about that is that if you can create some disposable income or money that you could then spend pro-socially, you actually could buy some happiness for yourself.
Interesting. I have a theory about that, actually, which one of the things that I found is that people who donate a lot of money, and not just 1 or 2% of their income, but 10 or 20% or more of their income, they've said that when they're having hard times, they increase the amount of charity that they give. And my theory on this is that when you begin to see the money that you're earning not as your own money, but just as you're the trustee of some trust, and whether it's from a religious standpoint, a lot of my clients are very religious, and they live in Israel, and they, as part of that, they give their 10 or 20%, and it's as if you're the trustee of God's trust account. You have this obligation. You're no longer giving away your own money. You just have this awesome, awesome meaning fun job of actually deciding where can I go help people. And I think that makes them, it means that the money isn't adding stress. Rather, it really is helping to make others happy, which I think can make you yourself happy.
It's a change in philosophy. Is money just there to provide security for you? And if it's just for security, that means we constantly feel threatened, actually. But as soon as the money is there, you're a steward to be able to help other people, that you're part of a larger narrative. You're part of a larger meaning of being able to help and give back to the world, and you are a steward. What we found is exactly that. And that's what I was finding at the divinity school, is that people who that believe that this money is not just theirs, but that they can use it to make a better world. I see it even with my own work, that when I go give a talk, and if it's about money for myself, like I'll feel stressed about it, or I'll be like, do I want to do this? But as soon as it's for somebody else, as soon as I'm like, well, I could donate this, or I'm going to give this to this charity, then suddenly I'm so excited. I'm so engaged with that exact same external reality. And so what I think is so important is how we think about the money that we have and how we use it. And so I love what you're describing there, because I believe that fits so well with positive psychology.
All right, so in the last minute, Shawn, you said that you would give us the one thing we could do. Let's get a takeaway for the listeners of the Goldstein on Gelt show. What is the one thing they can do today to just make it a happier day?
I think right along with this idea is making somebody else happier, but we don't necessarily have to give away 99% of our income to make that happen. In fact, we found that you can change your levels of happiness from your genetic set point and actually maintain it if you just wrote a 2-minute email praising or thanking one person in your life. We did this at Facebook, and I had them take 2 minutes each day for 21 days in a row and write a positive email praising or thanking somebody that they know. And within that 2 minutes, what happens is if you do it today, you're going to be addicted, because you're going to spend all day long thinking about how amazing you were for writing that email in the morning. but 21 days later, your brain realizes you have incredibly robust social support. You have 21 people you meaningfully activated with your actions. And what we find is social support is the greatest predictor of your long-term happiness. Social connection is a greater predictor of profitability than your intelligence and the collective IQs on your teams. And my favorite stat, and the last one, is that social support is as predictive of how long you'll live as obesity, high blood pressure, or smoking. We know how important the negative is, but we forget about how powerful the positive is.
All right, that is very, very positive and a great idea. And I am okay, I'm going to put it on my to-do list to try that also for the next 21 and hopefully many, many more days. We've been talking to Shawn Achor, who is the best-selling author of Before Happiness and The Happiness Advantage. Shawn, in the last few seconds, just tell us, how can people follow your work?
You can find us at happinessadvantage.com, or you can watch that free TED Talk online if you just search for Shawn, Shawn, and happiness, and it'll pop right up. And that's a 10-minute version of the research that I've been doing.
All right, and we'll put links to all of that on the show notes at goldsteinongelt.com. Shawn, thanks again very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.